Don Javier Castillo looked me dead in the eye and said, "We're not wasting our time on your pathetic little promotion ceremony." Then he shrugged and reached for the remote like he'd just commented on the weather. That was a Thursday night. 3 days later, I stood inside a packed ceremony room at Fort Meade in full dress blues, staring at 2 empty seats in the middle row while everybody else around me hugged their families. Funny thing about army ceremonies, they all smell the same: burnt coffee floor wax, cheap perfume, starch from freshly pressed uniforms. You spend enough years in the military, your body recognizes it before your brain does. The room buzzed with noise, that morning: proud parents, wives adjusting collars, grandkids climbing onto folding chairs. One older man in suspenders was already crying before the ceremony even started. And there I was, 37 years old, 18 years in uniform, about to pin on major after clawing my way up from enlisted intelligence analyst to Pentagon operations. Completely alone. Well, mostly alone. My neighbor old Ramon had come. 72 years old, retired Army Master Sergeant, walked with a cane and complained about his knees every time it rained, which in Maryland was basically every other day. He sat in the back holding a Dunkin' coffee and gave me a little nod when I walked in. That nod almost broke me more than the empty seats did, because at least somebody showed up. I kept looking toward the doors anyway, stupidly, like maybe my parents would walk in late and wave apologetically from the back. But they did not. Of course they did not. Colonel Morales stood beside me near the stage before the ceremony started. "You good, Vargas?" he asked quietly. "Absolutely, sir." That was the Army answer. It did not matter if your life was on fire. You learned how to say absolutely. He studied me for a second longer than I liked. Then he said softly, "You earned this rank." Simple sentence, but I almost lost it right there, because my family never talked that way. In my parents' house, achievement always came with a condition attached. My younger brother Alejandro bought a used boat, genius businessman. I spent 12 months in Afghanistan. Well, at least you were not infantry. Alejandro opened a failed auto detailing company. He is entrepreneurial. I finished officer candidate school while working night shifts and recovering from a deployment injury. You always were stubborn. Nothing ever counted fully. Not really. The ceremony started at 10 sharp. National anthem, opening remarks, promotions one by one. I stood there listening while families clapped for their sons and daughters. Some people had flown in from Texas, Arizona, Florida. One grandmother brought flowers bigger than the poor lieutenant receiving them. Then my name echoed through the room. Captain Elena Vargas, soon to be Major. I walked forward, automatically, muscle memory carrying me the rest of the way. And that is when I saw those 2 empty chairs again. Middle row. Perfect view of the podium. Empty. I suddenly remembered the last school event my parents ever attended for me. My high school graduation in Havenwood. Summer of 2004. Don Javier complained the folding chairs hurt his back. Sofia spent most of the ceremony talking about Alejandro's baseball tournament the next weekend. 20 years ago. Jesus. Colonel Morales pinned the gold oak leaves onto my uniform carefully. "You make the Army proud," he said. People clapped. Old Ramon whistled loudly from the back row. I smiled, because that is what you do when people are looking at you, but inside something just felt tired. Not angry yet. Past angry. You ever get hurt enough times by the same people that eventually the injury turns dull instead of sharp? That is what it felt like. Like emotional arthritis. After the ceremony, families crowded together, taking pictures outside near the flags. Phones out, arms around shoulders. Somebody popped champagne from a cooler in the parking lot, even though I am pretty sure that violated 6 military regulations. I stood there awkwardly holding a small cardboard box with my old captain rank inside it. Old Ramon shuffled over beside me. "Your folks really not come?" he asked carefully. I shook my head. "Hell with them," he muttered. Then he handed me a folded McDonald's napkin, because apparently I had started crying without noticing. That actually made me laugh a little. "Sorry," I said. "Do not apologize for having normal human emotions," he grumbled. Very Ramon answer. A young lieutenant walked by with his wife and little daughter. The kid saluted me seriously with sticky fingers covered in cupcake frosting. I saluted back. Then I got in my Honda Pilot and sat there in the parking garage for almost 40 minutes. Did not turn the engine on, just sat. My knees hurt. They always did after standing too long now. Afghanistan airborne school years of hauling gear around like I was indestructible. I loosened my collar and stared at the new gold oak leaf insignia in my palm. Major Elena Vargas. 19-year-old me would have cried from happiness hearing that. Back then I enlisted mostly because I needed to get out of Havenwood before I suffocated there. I still remembered my recruiter's office near the local mall. The buzzing fluorescent lights, the army posters taped crooked on the wall. The recruiter asked why I wanted to join. I almost said because nobody at home looks at me like I matter. Instead I said I need a challenge. I reached for my phone, opened Sophia contact. My thumb hovered there for a long time. Then my hand started shaking. Not dramatic shaking, just enough to annoy me. I realized something sitting there in that parking garage. I kept waiting for people who had already decided who I was years ago. To them I was never the successful one, never the important one, just the difficult daughter who joined the army instead of settling down somewhere nearby and making life convenient for everybody else. I hit delete. Her number disappeared off my screen. And in that quiet garage with fluorescent lights humming overhead, I whispered something I did not realize I had been needing to hear. I guess this one was just for me. 6 weeks later, a photo from a Pentagon cybersecurity briefing appeared in the Washington Post. I was not even the focus of the picture. A senior defense official stood at the podium speaking about infrastructure attacks. I was off to the side in uniform reviewing documents while 2 armed security personnel stood nearby. That was it, one photograph. But back in Havenwood, Ohio, it might as well have been me landing on the moon. Old church friends started calling my parents. Neighbors suddenly remembered they knew me. People who ignored my existence for years started sharing the article online. Then, almost 2 weeks after the picture came out, my phone rang late on a Tuesday night. Unknown Havenwood number. I answered anyway. Sophia's voice came through warm as honey. Honey, why did not you tell us you were doing something this important? I should have hung up the second I heard my mother's voice. That is the honest truth. Not because I hated her. It would have been easier if I did. Hate is simple, clean. What I felt was messier than that. It sounded ridiculous, but even at 37 years old, part of me still wanted my mother to sound proud of me without there being some angle attached to it. Instead, she said the ladies at St. Carmen's would not stop talking about that newspaper photo. There it was. Not how are you? Not congratulations. Not even we missed your ceremony. Straight to the audience reaction. I leaned back against my kitchen counter in Alexandria and looked out the window toward the parking lot below. Rain streaked across the glass. Somebody was walking a golden retriever through the drizzle while carrying a grocery bag over their head. Mom, I said carefully. It was just a press briefing. Well, apparently not just a press briefing. She laughed softly. Your father has been showing everybody that article. That almost made me choke. Don Javier, the same man who called my promotion ceremony pathetic, now suddenly acting like I was some hometown hero. I closed my eyes for a second. You there? She asked. Yeah, well. Her tone shifted into that fake casual voice I knew too well. We would really love for you to come home for a few days. Your father misses you. No, he did not. But I let her keep talking anyway. She mentioned church friends, neighbors, Alejandro, kids asking about Aunt Elena from the newspaper. Every sentence circled back to how impressed people were. Never once how proud they were of me as a person. There is a difference. People over 50 probably understand that difference better than anybody. By the time we hung up, my stomach hurt. I poured myself stale coffee from the morning pot and stood there in my socks staring at the Pentagon briefing photo pulled up on my laptop. It really was not anything special. Me in uniform, security guys nearby, papers in my hand. But in Havenwood, Ohio, perception was everything, especially in the old Catholic neighborhoods where everybody quietly measured everybody else's life. Who got divorced? Who drank too much? Who lost money? Whose kids moved away and never came back? And suddenly I had become useful. That realization sat heavy in my chest. A few days later, Alejandro texted me for the first time in almost 8 months. Hey sis, proud of you. Need to ask a small favor when you come home. I stared at the message long enough for my phone screen to dim. Then another text appeared. Nothing major, just business advice. I laughed out loud at that. Not happy laughter either. The kind where you realize something ugly is unfolding right in front of you. Alejandro never contacted me unless he needed something. Growing up, he had this unbelievable ability to fail upward. Business collapses. Bad economy. Divorce number 2. She was crazy. Meanwhile, if I got a B+ in school instead of an A, my mother acted like I had spit on the Constitution. I set my phone down and tried to ignore the crawling feeling in my gut. But 2 days later, things got worse. Much worse. I was walking out of a secure meeting room at the Pentagon when my work phone buzzed. Unknown internal number. Major Vargas. Ma'am, this is Special Counsel Warren from Pentagon Legal Affairs. Do you have a moment? That sentence alone could ruin somebody's week. I stepped into an empty hallway. Yes, sir. There was a pause. Then. Your name has surfaced during an ongoing federal procurement investigation involving Grupo Castillo Supply and Logistics out of Ohio. My blood went cold immediately. Alejandro, of course. I leaned against the wall hard enough my shoulder hit a framed Air Force photo behind me. What kind of investigation? Fraudulent representation connected to defense subcontracting. I closed my eyes. Jesus Christ. The attorney continued in a flat professional tone. Your brother has reportedly referenced your Pentagon position in multiple recommendation letters. I never wrote recommendation letters for Alejandro. We are aware of that now. That word stayed with me. He emailed several documents while we spoke. I opened the first attachment with shaking hands. There it was. My forged signature, my rank, my title, recommendation for preferred vendor consideration. It looked convincing enough to scare me. Sir, I said quietly. I had absolutely no involvement in this. We understand your position, Major. However, until the investigation concludes, you need to avoid any direct communication regarding these contracts without legal awareness. The hallway suddenly felt too warm. I loosened my collar slightly. What happens if investigators think I knew? Long pause. Then you could lose your clearance pending review. I swallowed hard. And my pension. Another pause. We are not there yet. Not there yet. Wonderful. When the call ended, I stood in that hallway staring at my own forged signature for almost a full minute. 18 years. Deployments, missed holidays, torn cartilage, divorce, sleepless nights. Everything I built suddenly felt fragile. All because Alejandro wanted to play businessman. That evening I drove to Colonel Morales' house in Arlington. He lived in one of those old brick neighborhoods full of retired military offices and painfully organized garages. His wife gave me coffee while he listened quietly from the kitchen table. When I finished explaining everything, he sat back in his chair and rubbed his jaw. You know what the worst part is? I asked. I am not even surprised. No. He said calmly. You are disappointed. Different thing. I stared at him. He continued. Vargas in intelligence work. The most dangerous enemy is not the one who hated you from the beginning. He pointed toward the newspaper clipping folded beside my coffee cup. It is the one who suddenly smiles after discovering you are valuable. That sentence landed hard because it was true. Not just about operations, about families too. A week later my mother called again, asking when I would be flying home. This time her voice sounded tense underneath the sweetness. Too careful, like she was following a script. I finally agreed to come for the weekend, mostly because I needed to see Alejandro face to face before federal investigators did. The flight from Reagan National to Cleveland was delayed almost 2 hours because of storms over Pennsylvania. I sat near Gate 34 eating terrible airport chili while rereading the investigation documents on my tablet. Every page made things worse. Fake recommendation letters, references to Pentagon relationships, claims that Major Elena Vargas personally supported vendor reliability. At one point Alejandro had even copied language directly from an Army procurement template. He was not just exaggerating. He was impersonating federal authority. And somehow he thought this was fixable. While boarding started, another email arrived from Pentagon Legal. Additional evidence attached. I opened it after takeoff. Halfway through the flight my stomach dropped. Alejandro had not just forged my name. He had told people I was backing him personally inside the Department of Defense. I stared out the airplane window into black clouds somewhere over Ohio and finally understood something. That family meeting was not about reconnecting. It was not about healing. It was about saving Alejandro. And if I was not careful, they were perfectly willing to drag me down with him. Havenwood looked smaller every time I came back. Not physically smaller, obviously, just worn down around the edges in a way that sneaks up on you once you have spent enough years away. The old Goodyear plant area looked grayer than I remembered. Storefronts sat empty along Market Street. A diner I used to love as a kid had plywood over the windows now. Rain drizzled across the windshield as I drove my rental car through my old neighborhood on the west side. Small brick houses, faded porch flags, plastic Virgin Mary statues in front yards. Nothing really changed there. That was part of the problem. My parents still lived in the same split-level house I grew up in. Same cracked driveway, same crooked basketball hoop Alejandro nearly broke his neck on in 8th grade. I parked and sat there for a second with the engine running. My stomach already hurt. Then the front door flew open before I even grabbed my bag. Elena. Sofia hurried outside, smiling so wide it looked painful. She hugged me tightly. Too tightly. The performance had started. "Oh my God, look at you," she said, stepping back to admire the uniform hanging in my garment bag. "You look so important now." Interesting choice of word. Inside the house smelled like pot roast and lemon furniture polish. Everything looked almost exactly the same as it had 15 years ago. Same wooden cross over the dining room entrance. Same family photos lining the staircase. Only now there was a framed newspaper clipping sitting on the coffee table. The Pentagon photo front and center. I just stared at it. Don Javier walked in from the kitchen carrying a beer. "There she is," he announced loudly. "The Pentagon celebrity." Then he kissed the top of my head like we had always been close. It felt so unnatural. I nearly stepped backward. "You hungry?" Sofia asked quickly. "Long flight. How is Washington? Do you work with senators?" Question after question after question. Not one apology. Not one mention of the promotion ceremony they skipped. I noticed that immediately. Alejandro showed up an hour later wearing a Browns hoodie and acting like nothing in the world was wrong. That was Alejandro gift. He could stand inside a burning building and still behave like everybody else was overreacting about the smoke. "There is my favorite federal employee," he said, hugging me. "You only have one federal employee sibling." Exactly. He smelled faintly like whiskey and expensive cologne, trying too hard to cover cigarette smoke. We sat around the kitchen island while Sofia brought out food nobody really touched. Alejandro kept steering the conversation toward business. Contracts, suppliers, transportation delays. Finally he leaned closer. "So hypothetically," he said casually, "if somebody exaggerated a professional connection on paperwork." I looked at him flatly. "Hypothetically, come on, Elena." "No, you come on." The room got quiet. Alejandro sighed dramatically and rubbed his forehead. "I was trying to keep my business alive." "You forged Pentagon documents." I borrowed credibility. I actually laughed at that. Not because it was funny. Because hearing a 42-year-old man describe federal fraud like a creative resume decision was insane. Don Javier jumped in immediately. "Now hold on. Nobody is saying Alejandro is perfect." "Really?" "Because that would be a refreshing change." His expression hardened instantly. There it was. The old family dynamic clicking back into place like muscle memory. Alejandro screws up. Elena becomes the problem for noticing. Sofia stepped between us emotionally before anybody could raise their voice. "We are all tired," she said softly. "Let us not do this tonight." That first evening dragged on forever. At one point neighbors from 2 houses down randomly stopped by after hearing I was home. Randomly, my ass. Don Javier practically puffed his chest out, introducing me. "This is my daughter Elena. She works with the president." "I have never met the president, Dad." "Well, you know what I mean." No, I did not. The neighbor asked what branch I served in. Before I could answer, Don Javier proudly declared, "She is basically CIA Army or something." I stared at him. "Military intelligence." I corrected quietly. "Right, government spy stuff." 18 years. He still did not know what I actually did. Not really. That hit harder than I expected. Later that night, after everybody finally went to bed, I stood alone in the upstairs bathroom staring at myself in the mirror. The overhead light was too bright, harsh. I looked tired. Not old exactly, just worn down in places life had leaned on too hard. I turned on the sink faucet to drown out the sound when I started crying. My knees throbbed from the flight. I rubbed one absent-mindedly while looking at an old framed photo sitting beside the medicine cabinet. Me and my ex-husband Mateo at a military banquet almost 10 years earlier. I was thinner then. Happier too, maybe. At least I looked happier. Mateo used to joke that the army would get my body and my family would get whatever scraps were left afterward. Turns out my family did not want the scraps either. I wiped my face and laughed bitterly at myself. 37 years old major in the United States Army crying in my childhood bathroom like a teenager. The next morning things got worse, much worse. Sofia spent breakfast talking about church gossip while Don Javier read the Havenwood Beacon Journal sports section like nothing mattered. Alejandro eventually wandered downstairs around 10 wearing sweatpants. "Hey," he said quietly to me. "Can we talk outside?" We sat on the back patio while cold October wind rattled dead leaves across the yard. For the first time since I arrived, he actually looked nervous. "I need help," he admitted. "There it is. Elena, listen." "No, you listen. Pentagon Legal already contacted me." His face lost color immediately. "They actually called you?" "Yes." Alejandro stared out toward the fence. "I never meant for it to get this big. You forged federal documents. I was desperate. You used my name. Because people respect you." That sentence made me unexpectedly angry. Not because it was false. Because nobody in this family respected me until other people started doing it first. Alejandro leaned forward. "If this collapses, I lose everything. You should have thought about that earlier. My kids could lose the house." There it was. The emotional hostage tactic. When guilt failed, family weaponized children. I stood up before I said something cruel. That afternoon I overheard my parents talking downstairs while I carried laundry past the basement stairs. Don Javier's voice floated upward. "Tell her to sign whatever Alejandro needs." Sofia answered nervously. "What if she refuses?" Don Javier snorted. "What else does she have? She is divorced, no kids, money sitting in the bank doing nothing." I froze. Then he added the sentence that changed everything. "And if she will not help, family will make sure people know she turned her back on us." Something inside me went completely still after that. Not rage, not heartbreak, clarity. That night, lying awake in my old bedroom listening to the furnace kick on and off, I finally understood something. They were not asking me to save Alejandro. They were asking me to sacrifice myself for Alejandro the way I always had. Only this time the cost could destroy my entire life. The next morning, before anybody else woke up, I sat in my rental car outside a Dunkin' near Interstate 77 and made a phone call. "Defense Criminal Investigative Service." The woman answered. I took a slow breath. "This is Major Elena Vargas," I said. "I am ready to cooperate fully." Sunday dinner at Alejandro House started at 4 in the afternoon and somehow already smelled like beer by 3:30. That was pretty standard for my brother. His place sat on a cul-de-sac in one of those newer Havenwood subdivisions built during the housing boom back before everything crashed. Vinyl siding, oversized pickup trucks, plastic skeleton decorations still sitting on porches 2 weeks after Halloween because nobody bothered taking them down. I parked half a block away and sat in the car for a minute watching people drift in through Alejandro front door carrying casseroles and folding chairs. Family gathering. That is what my mother called it. But everybody knew what it really was. A performance. Alejandro wanted witnesses around him. Human shields. If enough relatives packed the room, maybe nobody would ask hard questions. I checked my watch. 4:07 p.m. Then I stepped out of the car wearing full army dress uniform. The cold air hit my face immediately. Funny thing about military uniforms. People react to them before you even speak. Some straighten up automatically, others get uncomfortable, and certain people suddenly see you as valuable. When I walked up the driveway carrying a folder under my arm, conversations actually slowed near the garage. My cousin Linda blinked twice. "Jesus, Elena," she said. "You look official." Apparently that is my personality now. A few people laughed nervously. Inside Alejandro House looked like every Midwest family gathering rolled into one. Football game on TV, aluminum trays of baked ziti, folding tables, beer bottles everywhere, somebody arguing about politics in the kitchen. Sofia rushed over immediately. "Oh honey, everybody is so excited you came." She kissed my cheek and whispered, "Please keep things calm today." Interesting choice of words. Keep things calm. As if I was the dangerous one. Don Javier stood near the fireplace holding court with 3 older men from church. The second he spotted me, his face lit up. "There she is," he announced loudly. "My Pentagon daughter." I almost flinched hearing that. Not because it hurt anymore, because it sounded so fake. He wrapped an arm around my shoulder and started introducing me around like I was some kind of trophy. "This is Major Elena Vargas, Cyber Operations." He said it proudly now. Learned the phrase recently apparently. One of the older men nodded respectfully. "Well, thank you for your service, Major." That part still always got me. Strangers respected my service more than my own family ever had. Alejandro appeared carrying a beer and grinning too widely. "There is my sister," he said loudly. Probably the smartest person in the entire Department of Defense. That is definitely not true. Still humble too. He kept talking before I could answer. You should hear the kind of projects she works on. Classified stuff. Real high level. I noticed something then. Alejandro was sweating slightly. Not visibly enough for most people to catch, but I did, because underneath all the performance and charm he was scared. Good. Dinner dragged on for over an hour. The TV stayed loud. Kids ran through the hallway. People passed around mashed potatoes while pretending everything was normal. Meanwhile, Alejandro kept casually mentioning future business opportunities. Once this next contract closes, we will finally be in good shape. All government work takes patience, but the connections matter. Connections. He kept looking toward me every time he said that word, trying to silently pressure me into playing along. At one point my mother leaned close and whispered, "Maybe after dinner you and Alejandro can figure things out privately." I looked at her. "You mean cover for him privately?" Her smile disappeared immediately. Across the table, Don Javier suddenly raised his beer bottle. "I just want to say something," he announced. Everybody looked over. I know families go through rough patches sometimes, but seeing Elena in that newspaper. He shook his head proudly. Made me realize how blessed we are. There were murmurs of agreement around the room, and something inside me finally broke loose. Not emotionally, strategically, because suddenly I understood the entire game. They did not want truth. They wanted restoration of comfort. They wanted Alejandro protected, their reputation protected, their little picture of themselves protected, and they expected me to help maintain it. I set my fork down carefully. "Actually," I said calmly, "there is something everybody should probably hear." The room quieted almost immediately. Alejandro's face tightened. I stood slowly. 18 years in the army teaches you how to control your breathing under pressure. Useful skill. 3 weeks ago, I said evenly, I contacted the Defense Criminal Investigative Service myself regarding fraudulent documents connected to Alejandro Company. Complete silence. You could hear the football game from the other room. Alejandro laughed nervously. "Okay, hold on." I opened the folder and placed several printed documents on the dining table. Forged recommendation letters, my fake signature, Pentagon references. I watched relatives lean forward reading them. Sophia's face drained white. Don Javier stared at the papers like they were written in another language. Alejandro finally snapped. "You went behind my back. You forged federal documents. I was trying to survive. You dragged my name into a federal investigation. You are my sister." There it was again. That word, sister. Funny how family only mattered when they needed something. Alejandro stood up so quickly his chair tipped backward. "You think you are better than everybody now because you wear that uniform. Then why are you doing this?" My voice stayed calm. Because if I raised it, they would all focus on my anger instead of his actions. I am doing this because I spent 18 years protecting my career while this family treated it like a joke. Don Javier slammed his hand on the table. Enough. I turned toward him slowly. "No, Dad. You had enough opportunities." Sophia started crying quietly. Real tears too. That part almost got me. Almost. Then the doorbell rang. Nobody moved. Alejandro looked terrified now. The bell rang again. I spoke without looking away from him. "I asked him to come tonight." Sophia gasped softly. Alejandro whispered, "Oh my God." Don Javier stared at me like he suddenly did not recognize his own daughter. I walked to the front door and opened it. 2 DCIS investigators stood outside beside an IRS agent in a dark overcoat. Professional calm, no dramatic raid jackets, no television nonsense, just paperwork and consequences. One investigator nodded politely. "Major Vargas, thank you for cooperating." Behind me the entire house had gone silent. The older relatives looked stunned. Kids peeked nervously from the hallway. Alejandro looked like he might throw up. The lead investigator stepped inside carefully. "Mr. Alejandro Castillo." Alejandro did not answer. Don Javier finally exploded. "You embarrassed this family." The words echoed through the room. For a second nobody breathed. Then I looked at him calmly and said the truest thing I had said all weekend. "No, Dad." My voice sounded tired more than angry. "I just brought this family the one thing nobody here ever wanted to give me." He stared at me. The truth. Nobody spoke after that. Not Alejandro. Not Sofia, not even my father. And standing there in my dress uniform while federal investigators quietly began their work behind me, I realized something strange. I did not feel victorious. I felt free. I left Havenwood before sunrise the next morning. Did not say goodbye. Did not leave a note. I just loaded my overnight bag into the rental car while cold November wind pushed dead leaves across my parents' driveway. The neighborhood was still dark except for one porch light across the street and the glowing red sign from St. Carmen's a few blocks away. For a second I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel staring at my childhood home. The split level looked smaller now, older, tired. Honestly, so did my parents. That was the part nobody warns you about when you spend years angry at your family. One day you look up and realize they got old while you were busy surviving them. The kitchen light flicked on upstairs. Probably my mother. I almost went back inside. Almost. Then my phone buzzed. Message from the lead DCIS investigator. Thank you again for your cooperation, Major Vargas. That settled it. I started the engine and drove away. The sun was barely coming up over Interstate 77 when I stopped at a rest area outside Canton for coffee. My knees hurt from the drive already. Rain was moving in again, the kind of grey Ohio morning that feels permanent. I stood near the vending machines drinking terrible coffee from a paper cup and suddenly realized something strange. My chest did not feel tight anymore. For weeks I had carried this pressure inside me. Fear, guilt, anger, all tangled together. Now there was just exhaustion. Clean exhaustion. Like finishing surgery after a 12-hour shift. The fallout came slowly after that. Federal cases take time. Alejandro called me 17 times over the next month. I never answered. Some voicemails were furious. Some crying. A few tried guilt. Sofia is a wreck. The kids keep asking questions. You destroyed everything over paperwork. That last one almost made me laugh. Paperwork. Only Alejandro could describe federal fraud like a parking ticket. Eventually his attorney advised him to stop contacting me. Good advice. 3 months later Alejandro accepted a plea agreement connected to fraudulent business representation and falsified procurement documentation. 3 years in federal prison. His company collapsed before sentencing even happened. Most of the employees left within weeks. His third wife filed for divorce 6 months later. Apparently financial ruin makes soulmates disappear quickly. Back in Havenwood, word spread the way it always does in old church communities. Quietly at first, then everywhere. My father stopped volunteering at parish fundraisers after people began asking questions. Sofia still attended Mass every Sunday, but one of my cousins later told me she started sitting near the back instead of the front rows she used to love. I did not celebrate any of it. That part matters because people think revenge feels exciting. Usually it just feels sad, especially when the people hurting you are also the people who taught you how to ride a bike or drove you to school when you had the flu. Life gets complicated when the same hands that failed you also once took care of you. By January I moved fully into a townhouse in Alexandria, Virginia. Quiet neighborhood, brick sidewalks, retired federal workers everywhere. You could walk into half the coffee shops nearby and overhear conversations about pensions, back surgeries, or government contracting. Honestly, I liked it. For the first time in years my home felt peaceful. No guilt, no sudden family drama, no emotional ambush waiting behind every phone call. One rainy Saturday afternoon I unpacked my dress uniform carefully and hung it inside the hallway closet. Then I placed a small potted snake plant beside the window nearby. Tiny thing, probably cost $15. But standing there looking at that plant sitting in the sunlight, I realized something. Everything in this home belonged to me. Every quiet moment, every piece of furniture, every decision. Nobody was demanding access to my life anymore. A few weeks later I drove over to see old Ramon. He opened the door wearing sweatpants, thick glasses, and an army sweatshirt, older than some active duty soldiers. You look terrible, he said immediately. Nice seeing you too. He grunted and waved me inside. We sat in his garage workshop drinking coffee while rain tapped softly against the metal door. I finally told him everything. The investigation, Alejandro, my parents, all of it. Old Ramon listened without interrupting. When I finished, he stared down into his coffee for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You did the honorable thing." I looked away. It did not feel honorable. It felt lonely. Maybe he saw that on my face because he added, "Problem is, honorable things usually hurt." That sentence hit harder than anything else had. I started crying almost immediately. Not loud crying. Just tired crying. The kind that comes out after you have held yourself together too long. Old Ramon pretended not to notice. Good man. Sofia kept leaving voicemails for months. Some apologetic, some manipulative, some both at once. One message said, "Your father's blood pressure has not been good since all this happened." Another, "We did the best we could." That one bothered me the most because sometimes we did our best is true and still not enough. Around springtime I finally mailed her a letter. 3 pages, no screaming, no accusations. I told her I loved her. I told her I hoped she stayed healthy. And I told her I would no longer participate in relationships where love only appeared when somebody needed something from me. Then I wished her peace. That was it. No dramatic ending. Real life rarely gives you those. Last October, almost a year after everything happened, I was walking through Old Town Alexandria one cold afternoon when I passed a group of older women veterans sitting outside a cafe laughing over coffee. Army, Navy, Air Force. Grey hair, bad knees, loud laughter. One woman caught me looking and raised her coffee cup toward me. I smiled back automatically. And standing there under orange autumn trees with traffic rolling slowly down King Street behind me, I realized something I wish I had understood years earlier. I was not alone. I never really was. For most of my life I thought strength meant enduring people who kept hurting me because they shared my last name. Turns out strength can also mean walking away peacefully. I did not win against my family. I just finally stopped losing to them. If you have ever spent years trying to earn love from people who only valued you when it benefited them, then you probably understand this story. And if you stayed with me until the end, thank you for listening tonight. Thank you for listening to today's story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. See you in the next story.